dreams, nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety, sexual dysfunction, feeling of isolation. When Norm Watt got shot, that really set me in a downward spiral for my mental health, and really the full fury of PTSD hit me.
Okay, life can be crazy. You're feeling like you're sinking, just trying to find a meaning. It's time for better thinking, yeah, better thinking. Time to tune in. Let's go.
Welcome back to Better Thinking Podcast. Today's guest is Daryl Green, Senior Sergeant Daryl Green, who unfortunately had an incident that occurred some years ago where he went to a routine call out for domestic violence and was shot in the face. This is his story around recovery, hope, those that were around him, and how he's become a better police officer and better human being since. Enjoy the story. Welcome back to Better Thinking Podcast. I've got Senior Sergeant Daryl Elliot Green here to talk to us about, I suppose in some sense, his lived experience, not only as a police officer, but an incident that occurred some time ago that really jumped out at me when doing research as to guests for the podcast. And I think Daryl's got something special to share with us, and more so about his journey as well post this incident, because that I think is, somewhat more of the inspirational side of the reason why, I've invited Daryl to the show. So thank you very much, Daryl, for coming, and welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure, Nesh.
Maybe we can start with tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the police force. I know it's probably a little while ago now, and then maybe just carry on into the story that way.
I come from a very loving family with an older brother, and I thought everybody's family was just like mine. I left high school and I never got into any of the university courses I was interested in, but I always liked being fit and active. I looked at joining the Army, but in 1991, the Australian Army wasn't very active. One morning, I'm at the kitchen table and my mum turns around and says, well, darling, why don't you join the police? And I thought, well, what I get to learn, I get to apply and I get to help people. And I put my application in, and here I am today, still a policeman.
Wow, it's just like that. I think I had a similar story where I think Mum and Dad said, hey, Nesh, why don't you join the Army? I scratched, but yeah, why not? Didn't know what I was getting into. So I've changed hats, obviously, since then. But tell me the rest of the story. You started, how old were you when you got in?
I was 18. I joined as a recruit. I graduated about 2 months before my 19th birthday, and I went into general duties, and I studied a Bachelor of Arts degree. My mum, urged me to continue with my education, and so I was working full-time, studying part-time, and earned a bachelor's degree in Justice Studies, and I was awaiting promotion for Senior Constable in the year 2000. And I was expecting a quiet Sunday night shift when everything changed.
In what sort of way?
3 a.m. in the morning, we were having a coffee with our sergeant at a BP service station, passing the time, and a police radio crackled, and I recorded in my notebook a routine job, and we attended it. It was death threats spoken 6 hours earlier. We arrived at the scene, my partner and myself in our vehicle. Our supervisor followed behind in his vehicle. We met two males on the driveway, started our investigation. Started to rain, we moved up to the veranda, continued our questioning. The sergeant then went down to his patrol car, entered the front seat, was using a mobile phone to do background checks on the suspect. My partner and I then went down to his car, and since there was no imminent threat to life, we had to make a decision. There was death threats. It was over a $20 football bet. These men are falling out over. It was an allegation that he had illegal firearms, and we had to make a decision on their credibility and if we were going to immediately enter the house and search for this weapon? They all lived in this cul-de-sac very close, or did we need to go to a justice of the peace and get a search warrant? So my sergeant's in the front seat on the mobile phone. My partner enters the front passenger seat, and she's using the police radio to do background checks on the 2 males that callers to the address. I open the rear passenger seat, sit down and slide across so I can listen to the information coming in on the mobile phone and over the radio. And we were only going to be there a few moments, so I left the rear passenger door open. It's dark, still it's quiet.
Kind of sounds fairly run of the mill. I'm sure, as you say, a routine call. You're just doing your checks, making sure. I'm sure there's plenty of allegations that go around all the time that you guys are required to follow up on.
It's a very common thing. People, when they heat of the moment, to fly off the handle and make all sorts of threats and allegations, and it's often more to do with intimidation rather than acting on it. But it's still an offence to make a threat. And but there was allegations of a weapon, but we just don't kick doors down on without doing our due diligence. To ensure that we have a reasonable suspicion that this person does have illegal firearms and has made such threats. So, and since it's been 6 hours since these threats were made, and the longer the time since a threat's been made, the less likelihood of it being carried out. But we're just beginning this. The sergeant had been in the car maybe 3 or 4 minutes. When I entered the vehicle, I was only in there for about 30 seconds, and the rear side door's open, the interior lights on so the sergeant can read his notebook. My partner's on the mobile phone, and from my left, outside the door, I hear this pat, pat, pat sound. And what immediately ran through my mind is, what could that possibly be? It must be some neighbourhood dog that's running out the patrol car. So I nonchalantly turned and looked. But I had no night vision, couldn't see what was outside. But pretty much as soon as my head was facing out the door, in an instant, my head's been forced from there over to my right-hand side, down onto the back seat of the patrol car, because it was in fact a man with a .22 rifle about a metre away, shot me in the face and shot me in the shoulder. And my hands went around my mouth, and there's blood, teeth, and there's bone. I sit up. My partner, my sergeant, his seat is empty, his door is open. My partner looks completely still, and I didn't know if she was dead or alive. And I drew my firearm and I went out through the door that I got shot through, and I went after the gunman.
My goodness. So you just turned, and it was like getting punched in the face. You just felt a strike that forced your head across to or
I wouldn't even say it was like that. It was just instantaneous, the power of it. When I've been punched, I used to do karate, and obviously I've been involved in some fights in the police, and there's a bit of lag time. There was no lag time. In one instant, my head's facing out the door, and in the next instance, all I know is my head's on the back seat of the patrol car, and my hands are around my mouth, blood, teeth, and bone. And this was actually all recorded over a mobile phone by police communications. The sergeant's on the mobile phone doing background checks on the suspect. It gets dropped out the window, it lands on the patrol on the roadway, and so the next few minutes of me getting out, my challenge to the offender, my search for the sergeants are all recorded.
So what did you do? So you kind of somewhat recovered and got up. You said you drew your firearm while you were still in the car?
I drew my firearm in the car, shouted to my partner, get help. I went out to the door that I got shot through, my firearm pointing out towards the door, and I was the adrenaline kicked in, and I was simply enraged at this cowardly act. I called on the gunman to return and face me, and he didn't. And I quickly realised I don't know where my sergeant is, and so I started walking down the street yelling out, "Chris, Chris, Chris." And when they first heard the audio, they asked me, "What were you saying?" And I told them. So when I speak and I play the audio of the shooting, I actually have the words scrolling down the screen so people can read it, because the bullet had smashed a large portion of my maxilla bone. So that's the bone just below, that part of the jaw, taken out 3 top teeth, smashed 2 bottom teeth, ended my tongue and lodged in my throat. So it was actually very hard for me to speak.
My God.
Pronounce the words. but I felt no pain whatsoever. I didn't even know until later I'd been shot in the shoulder, and the bullet actually I was shot in the arm and the bullet lodged in the shoulder. And so, yes, I've called on him to return. I've searched, couldn't find him.
Where was the shooter at that point?
That time, I believe he's decamped by then. The lead investigator into the matter, which turned into a coroner's inquiry, felt that my actions, because the offender was armed with a 10-round magazine, and he had a second 10-round magazine, and his conclusion was that he thought the gunman would not expect anybody after being shot at such close range to get out the vehicle and challenge them. And so that this person's decamped from the scene, and 3 weeks later he was found. He's used that second cartridge with 10 rounds in it, and one bullet took his own life.
So he actually fired 10 rounds into the vehicle, and you'd taken 2 of those.
Yep, one in the face, one in the shoulder, 2 into my sergeant, 1 into his shoulder, 1. He likes to say his lower back, but it's actually his backside. 6 into my partner, and she was very, very lucky, hit no vital organs, and she crawled up into a ball, sort of protecting herself, and was very lucky that again, no vital organs was hit. But we also had a bit of luck on our side that he was. The firearm expert said at the academy to me, if he had a normal .22 rifle, I'd be dead, my partner would be dead, and the sergeant would be very sore. But because he had sawn off the rifle, put on a homemade silencer, which greatly reduced the power of the weapon, this all went in our favour to reduce the power and had less penetrating power. Basically, the round wouldn't have travelled as far as it normally would.
Wow. So he used a silencer that he'd made, and what sort of person goes out sawing a rifle to bits? And
he was a deeply disturbed person. I have his criminal profile, and sometimes, depending on the audience, I'll make that available to them, what was put together in the aftermath. And just unfortunately, he came from a good family, but he turned out to be a bad egg and had some very serious mental health issues. Was a petty criminal, difficult in communicating. And it's just a very sad story for him and his family, and the pain that he inflicted on me and my partner and my sergeant and our family. It was a real ripple effect. And to this day, not a day that goes by like I have to take very special care of my dental hygiene. I look in the mirror, I see the scars on my arm, I see the tracheotomy I have to have. It's people like to, I've been asked, is that closure? And I'm just thinking, you're so lucky that you don't have the understanding. It's like asking, somebody, who's been through a horrific traffic accident and seen somebody killed, or been to war and seen their best friend step on a landmine and blowing up. It's been 10 years. Is that closure? I don't know anybody who's found composure, be able to put it behind them, but things will come back. Remembrance days, movies, people's comments, and dreams out of all sorts of things.
Absolutely, makes a lot of sense. Is this gentleman's record public record? Is that something that is available that we can share with our listeners, or is that something that is a private, considered personal? It
is a confidential document, but there's plenty of information about him on the website, on the World Wide Web, and on my website. But there probably needs to be a freedom of information request, or we now call a right for information request, and that would then be made available.
Sure. So you're now walking down the street calling for your sergeant. You mentioned. Bring me back to that moment. Sorry.
a cul-de-sac, and when I speak, I have a street diagram just to make it easier to show people. Here's the patrol car. Here's the street. Here's where the cars were parked. Here's where we're sitting in the car. This is my movement when I got out the car. I've circled around the cul-de-sac, gone into fight mode, started walking down the street, and I yelled out, for him initially, but then I was yelling at Chris. It was called on the audio. It's actually 8 times that's been recorded. Then the radio cut out. And but there was people started to come out, and so I've turned around and I've confronted these people, realised they weren't a threat, and I've given them a direction to move back into the house, and that's been recorded in witness statements from the street. So I was able to identify that they were not a threat, which I was very proud of, actually. One of the things is your finger. You watch police movies or even military movies, and you see soldiers or police moving around, and they're not, prepared to fire, but their finger's on the trigger. Well, you know from the military, your finger doesn't go into the trigger.
No.
The intention to fire, and so it's something I'm very proud of. That there was a number of people come out in the street. Not once did my finger go on the trigger. I was able to recognise they weren't a threat, directed them back in the houses, and then I've come back and I've stood at the front of the bonnet of the police car. And it was quite a long walk because I didn't know what I was going to find. But my partner says, "Greenie, I'm hurt. Greenie, I'm hurt." Well, that was music to my ears because I knew Charnel, she was alive. And so I'm leaning on the bonnet of the patrol car with my right forearm, holding my firearm in that hand. I'm holding my mouth in my left hand, trying to staunch the flow of blood. And years later, Charnel confided in me. So I'm saying to her this time, "Char, it'll be all right. It'll be all right." And years later, she said to me at that point in time, she's thinking, "We don't know where a sergeant is. There's a gunman on the loose and you're pouring blood all over the bonnet of the police car. Greenie, you're not very reassuring."
That's that one moment where no matter what you say, it's not... it's certainly not congruent with the situation at hand.
Yes.
Are you feeling pain at this stage, or the adrenaline's going, the endorphins are doing what they need to do? You're kind of in a bit of a haze.
Not at that stage. It was then a few minutes later that the first officer arrived, a very brave man, Senior Constable Brett Price. He was working by himself. First on the scene, and he was a bit of a naughty boy. He didn't follow police procedure, which was to stop his car, take out the heavy ballistic vest and place it on it, and then put in the ballistic plates. No, he wanted to get to us as soon as possible and was expecting to find at least one dead officer. So I've staggered into the middle of the street, met Brett, and he's moved me back over to where Charnel is. She tried to get out of the vehicle, and she was so badly and she collapsed on the ground. And Brett got between us, and he asked me where the firing came from, and so he's scanning the houses where the direction the gunman came from. First ambulance came in, and they collected Charnel, and I'm very proud of this. They saw me first, and they were coming towards me, but I was really worried about my partner, so I waved them to my partner, and Brett also directed them to go to Charnel, and so they loaded her onto a gurney, and they loaded her into the back of the ambulance and took off. Now the next ambulance.
I'm assuming you've still got your firearm drawn and you're just scanning the scene still.
I'm fairly dazed by this stage, and dazed and numb, like the adrenaline starting to go, and just the amount of blood loss that I was. But I still had my firearm out, pointing in the direction the offender came. And Brett was there, fully cognizant, completely scanning that direction that he come from and providing information back to police communications.
You've had no treatment at this stage. You're still. They had to obviously look after your partner. She was more.
Yeah, she'd taken more rounds, but actually it turned out when we got to hospital, my head wound was deemed the most serious. And
my goodness.
Public holiday, and normally they'd have 2 operating theatres, but since it was a public holiday, I only had 1, and they triaged, and I was actually the first one treated to remove that bullet from my head. And Charnel went in a few hours later, and followed by Chris many hours later. But they took Charnel away, and then the second police vehicle arrived with 2 officers in it, and then I was comforted by Senior Constable Dave Hornby. And by this time, I'm really starting to feel the pain. And the second ambulance arrived, but they stopped at the end of the street, and they were asking through their communications to our communications for a corridor of safety. But we didn't know where the gunman is, and we didn't have enough police resources to provide this corridor of safety. And so this conversation's going on over our police radios at the scene to our police communications being relayed back to their communication centre, going to the ambulance officers. I'm saying, Dave, when are they going to get it? When are they going to get it? By this time, I was in extreme amount of pain. My mouth and my shoulder, I was really hurting. And eventually they did come up. They checked me for my injuries, loaded me into the ambulance, and we drove to the location. The sergeant, he'd been hit twice. He's got out the vehicle. He's got over to the next street. He's found a house with a light on, immediately got on the phone, and he called for police backup. And so we've driven to where he was. He's exited the house. He jumped into the back of the ambulance. And I was very lucky. I had a paramedic, and he gave me instant pain relief. And Charnel didn't. They actually called into the Prince Charles Hospital. She was in so much pain, so she could get pain relief before going on to the Royal Brisbane Hospital. When Chris first entered that ambulance, so he said to me, Greenie, do you believe this? And I said, no. And he said, boy, that's a big needle. So the paramedics just giving me that first injection. So I'm very grateful to the Queensland Ambulance Force for the greatest hit of drugs I've ever had in my life.
And so so I'm if I'm understanding this correctly, the sergeant in all of this, obviously he's been struck twice, or been shot twice. Obviously, your partner and yourself. He's somehow been able to ascertain that the offender's kind of run off, and he's gone to basically call for backup to radio in or.
It was an extremely dynamic situation. He's exited the vehicle, and his firearm out, and he had it pointed at the ground, and he saw a person. He didn't know if it was me or the offender. And so he said to me, if I took the shot and killed you, I'd be a villain. If I took the shot and killed the offender, I'd be a hero. I couldn't afford to do that. And so he's made his way across the street, jumped over a
That's
chain.
Incredible restraint, isn't it? In the heat of the moment, I don't know how my head would be working at that point because of the fear. I think fear might get the better of me. That's.
There's been cases of that, where police have overreacted. There was an Australian woman shot by American police. He's been charged with murder and with overreaction, which is very, very sad. And so, to the credit to all the police on that night, to my sergeant, Chris Mulhall, who had his gun out, to Brett Price, who had his firearm out, to myself, who had my firearm out. People had come out in the street that we did not engage these people with our weapons. We were able to have the peace of mind to identify that they were not a threat, or the threat was unknown, and we couldn't take the risk of harming or taking an innocent life.
I don't know anything about the police training. I can only sort of talk about my own military sort of training, but you guys must have such a vigorous and excellent training program to drill that sort of attitude, and training to be able to work under such pressure, because that type of focus and attention to detail and consideration and mindfulness in chaos, carnage, is phenomenal. It really is.
I'm very fond of the saying, you don't rise to the occasions, you fall to the level of your training. And our safety aspect is paramount, and one of them is, your finger does not go on that trigger until you fully inform the intention to fire, and you must be, or somebody else must be at risk of grievous bodily harm or death. And so it's fairly intense at the academy, and we shoot once a year to qualify, which is more would be nice, but it's a huge impost. But fortunately, we have a very good record of when our officers have had to engage a threat that they have been found to be being lawful and being able to justify it. And nobody wants to shoot anybody, but there's occasions when they're coming at you with. I've seen some body-worn footage only just recently, a couple of years ago now, a man with a large iron pole coming at an officer, and they stopped their vehicles, and by the time they got out their vehicle, it was 30 seconds before the officer had to take out his firearm and engage the threat who was running towards him with a metal pole and shoot and kill the man. If you're hitting the head with a metal pole, we say one punch can kill. You're hitting the head with a metal pole, obviously do brain damage, grievous bodily harm, or even kill you. So,
absolutely. In your training, do you guys have to reach a certain grouping in your shooting? In the military? You get 3 shots, and you got to be able to group the 3 shots within a certain distance. Does that ring a bell for you guys at all? Do you do anything like that to look at accuracy?
Very, very similar. The training has changed as I was actually on a revolver at the time when the shooting took place. We were actually transitioning at the time to Glocks, and my partner, she had 12 months in the job, and she was trained in the Glock and was armed with a Glock, and I was only trained in a revolver, hadn't done the conversion course. But yes, we have each year they sort of tweak it, but there's various distances and various groupings, and an automatic fail is if you completely miss the target, that's an automatic fail, and you have to completely reset.
So my apologies, I did interrupt. We were at the point where you were in the ambulance at this point, being taken away.
Yes, and Chris, he's entered the back. And the paramedics by pain medication to me, thank goodness, and taken to the Royal Brisbane Hospital. We were triaged. I was the first one operated on. They removed the bullet from my head. It was quite a long procedure. By the time that they moved in, assessed and anaesthetic, it was about 3 hours, and then they operated on Charnel. The bullet in my arm, they didn't actually remove it till a few days later. They wanted to get my head wound stabilised. And anyway, so after those 3 hours, I operated on Charnel, and then it would have been sometime late in the afternoon that they finally operated on Chris.
When did they go back to your shoulder? 3 days later, you said?
I'm not sure. It was a couple, 1 or 2 days. One or 2 days. Yes, can't recall exactly when, but there was a delay on that because of the seriousness of the head wound. When I went to intensive care after the surgery, my father said to me, son, I could hardly recognise you. Your head had swelled to the size of a watermelon.
My goodness, that must have been absolutely awful for not only yourself but your family, your loved ones, for your fellow colleagues, the whole police force. In essence, there at I imagine your immediate station, or whatever the appropriate terms are, must have been just rocked everyone's world.
Oh, rocked to the core. Absolutely. It shook everybody. It was just unheard of. We unfortunately we've had officers have been shot and killed, but we've never had anything like 3 officers ambushed and shot multiple times, and incredibly we all survived. And it was only 7 weeks later that another officer attended a domestic violence incident, and he was shot once in the leg. His name was Norm Watt. He was a dog squad officer. This is Rockhampton. The bullet severed his femoral artery in his leg, and unless the blood flow is stopped from such a wound, you bleed out in about 4 minutes, and help did not arrive in time for Norm. So that really sent me into a downward spin for my mental health, just in the back of my mind, my own mortality, survivor guilt. We've shot multiple times, all of us. He shot once and dies. That was just 7 weeks later. Oh.
Do you mind talking me through your headspace, post surgery, whether it's, those days, whether it's weeks, the years since? Do you mind just talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, initially I was stunned and dazed, and then when Norm Watt got shot, that really set me in a downward spiral for my mental health, and really the full fury of PTSD hit me. Dreams, nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety, sexual dysfunction, a feeling of isolation, just overwhelming. And then I went through the operating, and so I was receiving some professional mental health from a psychiatrist and a police psychologist who was a Vietnam vet, who was incredibly helpful because he'd walked the walk. He'd been a point man in Vietnam, trip to booby trap. But then, there's all these operations I went through, and then this is 2003, and I'd returned to work after the first reconstruction was complete. I was very fragile, and I went and worked in a Task Force Argus, an internet team that investigates internet pedophilia, and I'm sent to see another specialist. His name's Dr. John Avia, another maxillofacial surgeon, and after the examination, he sits me down and says, "Daryl, I was just examining what's in your mouth. I couldn't clean what's in there with my instruments. There's no way you can clean it. You're at risk of septicemia, bloodborne disease, very dangerous. I'm sorry, your reconstruction has failed." And I was back to step one, and then again, PTSD came back because the operations were so intrusive. It was like a second trauma.
Wow! So each time, obviously, something so significant in terms of the damage just requires operation after operation after operation, and each one of those drags you back to the event and reminds you, and oh my goodness.
And I remember, one of the operations, I was waking up, and I thought of Parodi, and I just wanted to get him and throttle him by the throat. I was going through all this pain. Nobody likes going to the dentist, but what I went through was just horrifically painful. There's just only so much pain medication they could give me. Cutting out chunks of bone, moving it around, cutting out skin from the roof of my mouth and transplanting over the transplanted bone to be bone graft. There was, in fact, 17 major surgical procedures when I had a general anaesthetic, and that doesn't even include all the other minor dental work, endodontic work, a prosthodontist, and I'm just trying to think of the gum specialist that I had to see. Yes, it was. Somebody said to me once, they said, "Greenie, I would have just got a plate," but I was determined to try and get back to the old Daryl Green, and part of that was having my teeth and gum back, and was trying to have a normal mouth. And but I had a battle for years trying to be the old Daryl Green, and so something had happened. Like, I'd be out running in a car, I'd run over a pizza box, and then there'd be a loud pop, and I'd turn around, my fist would be raised. I was experiencing hyperarousal, and then I'd realise, it's just a car running over a pizza box, and I get really angry at myself and saying, well, the old Daryl wouldn't react like that. And it took about a good 10 years for me to accept and realise, well, I've had this extraordinary experience, and of course it's going to change me, and there's going to be residue that's there for the rest of my life, and accept that I'm a new person. And not only do I have some things that are problematic from the shooting, but I also have some goods that come, like a positive outlook on life, appreciating the small things in life, and not sweating the small stuffs. Making sure I enjoy a great life, planning it, reading good books, eating healthy, running, planning my next holiday.
You raised the length of time it took to get to this place of acceptance, and in some sense that was a bit of a pivotal moment for you. Something that I practice is a therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, and so much of it is based on trying to come to terms with those things that are, the most difficult, that are, places that we don't want to go to, that we kind of avoid or trying to push away from. We don't want to accept. We want to reject that. It sounds that something occurred for you, and I'm assuming you worked very, very hard at it over, many, many years, and something kind of came together and stuck, and it was like, greeny, so to speak, if I can use that term, was different, but that was kind of okay too. That we can't expect someone who's shot in the face and had 17 surgeries plus, who's almost lost their life, who's almost seen two of their other, colleagues killed, and and I'm assuming there's much, much more to the story that we haven't even touched on. That's probably the surface only, but coming to terms with, that would have been excruciating. A lot of work.
I could only really start to get to that point when I put the surgery behind me, because every surgical visit, and I grind my teeth, and I had a cracked tooth, and so it was only about 2 years ago that work cover opened up my case again, and they had to drill my tooth out twice and cap it, and they gave me a special plate, and because I still dream, and I know, like this, like a partner that I had recently said, you scream out at night, and I said no. So there's still a lot of stuff going on in there that I'm not aware of. So they gave me that plate, and I opened that up, and that brought back a few things, but getting the major stuff out the way, getting them out, that allowed me more clear-headed thinking space rather than just focus on these operations. And another pivotal point was in 2010, do you think I was a victim of a crime? Pretty simple question.
I'm not even going to answer that. That is pretty straightforward.
We have criminal compensation legislation in Queensland, and at the time that legislation said you're entitled to compensation if the offender is found guilty, if the offender is found insane, the offender goes missing. What scenario did they not include?
My goodness, suicide.
Precisely. And so for years, my lawyers wrote to the Queensland Department of Justice asking for an ex gratia payment. And in 2010, I picked up the phone to speak to my lawyer again, and she was going to tell me, I was told she's on maternity leave. And I said, no worries, I'll call back in a few months. But she made up her mind. When she was coming back to work, she was just going to tell me, Daryl, give up on your criminal compensation claim. You're just throwing away good money after bad and just not listening. But 2010 happened to also be the 10th anniversary of the shooting, the local newspaper. The Sunday Mail wanted to do an interview, and I agreed. They asked about that night, what's transpired since, and my hopes for the future. And I said, oh, by the way, I'm still pursuing criminal compensation. If you make an entry, it just might help. Well,
because I tell you what, this is like just madness.
There's an old American political saying, never pick a fight with the person who buys their ink and barrels. There's a one-page newspaper article, red tape ambushed, copper shot decade ago, still fighting for compensation. Got some people's attention. My compensation was finalised within 1 month.
Wow. So, isn't that amazing? Has the legislation or the code, or however we name that, has that since changed, or there was an exemption made?
Fortunately, it has been changed now. So that the lawyer was writing, saying an ex gratia payment, saying Daryl's a victim of a crime. The legislation is written in such a way that he's excluded. So they're asking for this ex gratia payment, but the legislation's been replaced, and it's a much more a broader definition. So people, in my circumstances, would be compensated. They wouldn't have to go through such hurdles.
Good on you. Good, well done for fighting and backing that on a principle basis. I know that not everyone wins these things. I know that a lot of people, end up throwing, good money after bad. But we need pioneers like yourself to say, I've been through hell, and I'm going to, despite all of this, I'm still going to pursue it. Well done. shows a lot of strength and character. I believe in it, and it changes it. It changes it for everyone else who's caught up in this sort of nonsense. Heaven forbid, caught up in the nonsense. So well done.
Yeah, there's a quote that I have on my website, and I come up with, and it's basically stubbornness in quantity has a quality all of its own.
But in some sense, you need that, right? I mean, to recover from something like this, I'm not sure if that's the correct word, but to kind of live with, if I can use that more appropriately, to live with something like this and continue to move forward, requires, a stubborn mule type attitude, and maybe that's kind of helped. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you got to pick your battles, and sometimes is it worth fighting or is it not? And I felt that was one that was worth fighting.
How have you worked in living with this, post-traumatic stress response that's been, part of your life since that time? Is that something that you manage more effectively now? Something you can live with more now?
I learned seeking professional help was very smart. Speaking to people who've been through other experiences, speaking to people who've been well past it beyond me, like the Vietnam vet who counseled me, just says, it was fascinating just speaking to him. It was about his time in Vietnam, so that was quite interesting. But he also gave me the hope. It says it gets easier as time goes on. It's still with me. He still has dreams and flashbacks. He'll be on antidepressant medication for the rest of his life. But that's, and I would agree, it does lessen over time. It's still there, and I have to work very hard at. Like, this is not, this is not easy. I can sort of feel the pressure around my temples. But what am I going to do? I'm going to go for a run. I find exercise, and there's been lots of studies on it, and running for me is very therapeutic. And I like cooking, so I'm going to cook one of my favourite dishes tonight. It's not a healthy dish. It's fried chicken and chips, but I'll cook it from the ground up. But I do enough running to compensate. I still have to use quite a bit of medication, especially for sleeping, but it's just sort of part of the process. And I've learned, I need to get to bed early, take that medication so I can get off to sleep and get a sound night's sleep, and then in the morning have a graduated waking process. Just depends what's sort of happening in my life. I have to work very hard at it, and I find diet, exercise, conversations with my dad, listening to inspiring other true stories, and one of them it worked for me was exposure theory. And do
you want to talk us through that for listeners, what you mean by that?
And so there'll be triggers. And so something will occur, or something will be seen, and it will trigger a memory, and you will have a reaction which can be quite uncomfortable. I'll give you an example. After the shooting, and this is literally just months afterwards, I'm off work. I'm facing the operations. They had to think actually how they're going to reconstruct it. It was a very long process and a very difficult reconstruction, and I was trying to do the things that I would do normally. So go to a night venue with friends, sit in the corner and have a quiet drink. And then all of a sudden, my heart raced, my pupils dilated. I'm extremely agitated and overwhelming. I've got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here. I leave the night venue. A friend had come in to me. And one of my mates joked. He said, "This happened so many times, Greenie. He owed me a couple $100 and from the drinks I left behind." And later on, professional help, I worked out what was happening. So, probably know, at our core level, the brain's a fairly simple instrument. And so what it was doing, it was the flashing lights at the night venue was what was causing my subconscious to recall the flashing lights of the blue and red police lights at the night of the shooting. This triggers dangerous for my subconscious. My body goes into survival mode, dilated eyes, the heart rate, the adrenaline rushing, etc. You're in danger and have to leave the venue to calm down and recover.
The amygdala?
Amygdala, yeah. doesn't have the complexity to put it in the context. Flashing lights, you're at a night venue with friends, there is no danger. No, it just says, flashing lights, last time there was flashing lights involved, you nearly got killed, you need to get out of here, buddy, and I'm going to start all the appropriate responses to give you the best chance of survival. So that was one of my first experiences with hyperarousal. And when that happened, I just thought I was going crazy. There was something wrong with me. With professional help, I learned what was going on there. And so other things would occur, and I'd have these hyperarousal reactions. And so to help with this, I went through exposure therapy with a Vietnam vet, and he got me just to lie back in his chair, close my eyes and talk about the night of the shooting. And the very first time I did this, and I got to the point of where I was describing being shot, it was so overwhelming. I've actually jolted out of the chair, I opened my eyes, and it was really confronting. But I did that 6 times with him, and by the end of it, I could talk about it, and there was no issue. And it's like the audio. So when I speak now professionally and I play the audio of the shooting, I've heard that so many times it doesn't bother me at the slightest. But there's been numerous things I've had to do to overcome, and one of them was a fear of firearms. And I'm decided to continue my career with the police with some encouragement of absolutely an amazing leader, the late Inspector David Andrew Stevenson. And I said, they've got a bit of an issue with firearms. I want to see if I can overcome it. He could have been very risk averse and said, if you react adversely to this course, could reflect poorly on me. But he built trust. We held courageous conversations. He backed my application. I was placed on the course, and I did have some overreactions and some flashbacks and some dreams, but I call them the coping mechanisms. This is 2008 when I did this, 8 years after the shooting, and so I was talking to my trusted supporters. When I have overreaction, the instructors were really good. They know what I'd been through. They came me away, calmed me down. We go back through the exercise until we got it right. And I overcome my fear of firearms and become a firearms instructor, and I'm still one to this day, and I'm highly proud of that. I'm actually just really grateful. I know this doesn't work for everybody, but for some reason, desensitization has worked wonders for me.
Probably another credit, and obviously I don't know all the complexities and the like, but credit to police force or this particular person. My apologies, I've just forgotten his name.
David Andrew Stevenson.
I mean, to go out and put his neck on the line, really, and say, I'll back it. I'll put my name to it, because this is what psychology would ask to be done. We've got to go out and test it. We can't go out and just say, this is going to be re-traumatizing and err on the side of caution, because that's not. As a matter of fact, that becomes another secondary insult. We've got to go out and give everyone an opportunity, because there are lots of times where your story would be, the expected story. Now, there are other times where someone still, the desensitization will not go out and do that. But the vast majority, I would say, I'd be fairly confident would have some improvement, if not, to the level that you explained. Having said that, there's a hell of a lot of work that goes in it. It doesn't just happen. You've got to really be willing. There's got to be a huge, willingness to sit in that discomfort and work through it and do it again and do it again and do it again. And I think willingness is part of that key. It sounds like you did that.
I remember we would leave the police academy on the bus to go to the firearm range, and my fists were on my legs, and I was flying white knuckle airlines, and I'd look around and I was just wondering, do people know how anxious I am? But that sort of experience has really helped me when I'm anxious again about doing something. I look back, well, I've been anxious in the past, and that was the right thing to do, to step up and keep on going. And one of my mantras is just keep on going. Don't know what to do, just keep on going, And change is constant. And if you don't know what to do, just keep on going. Like I'm very proud to be an ambassador for Lifeline, and people each sort of reach the end of what they think is, the end of the line. This is the easy solution, and it's not. Suicide just transmits that pain further and farther apart. And I say I did contemplate that. The times got so dark for me, and one of the stories I tell, I was facing the second reconstruction of my mouth. I'd been through hell. I knew what I was going back for, and they were cutting out a chunk of bone in my mouth with 3 pieces of titanium, rotating it around, taking another bone graft from my lower jaw, placing that in the just underneath my nose area as like a how would you describe it, Dad? A wedge, as a wedge. And I tried as the second reconstruction, I was out running, I crossed a bridge, I turned, I put both hands on the railing, I've looked down. I just said, life is just a struggle. I can jump it, it'll all be over. And it would have been just so easy just to take all my pain away, go into blackness. But being a police officer, I've been to suicides, I've seen the effects of families and friends, and I simply say, I can't do this to mum and dad. And so I turned and I continued running. I could see no light at the end of the tunnel, but thanks to a loving parents and knowing the effect that it had, that was able to keep me going. And look what's happened now. I've continued in my career. I've had 3 promotions. I've travelled the world. I've started a part-time speaking business. And I've got lots of good things. I'm sure there's going to be more pain in the future. As we get older, whatever it may be. But my next big thing is January. My brother and I have a ski trip booked in France. He lives in the UK with his family, and I visit every year. And that's my next big thing I'm looking forward to. And I always put a new book on my coffee table when I look forward to a trip. I see it every day, and it's just a reminder of what's to come.
These are some of the ripple effects. There's certainly been an enormous amount of negative ripple effects from what happened that evening, and I'm hearing there's also some positive ripple effects of appreciation for these opportunities that have been afforded to you or given to you or you've worked on, and even things like a trip with your brother is something that I can see in your face how fond. It looks like you're very fond of your brother and good mates, and excited to be doing so.
Oh, we're extremely close. He flew out when he got the news, and he was by the bedside, and we were best mates growing up. And he rings Dad every night from the UK just before he's going to work, or on the weekend he's going to do something with his boys. And we're extremely close. But I've met the best in people and the worst in people through this experience. And one of the lovely stories I like to tell, and my reconstruction was signed off as complete and finalised in 2006. And what happened next was my bottom teeth started to splay apart. So if you do something in one part of your mouth, often has an effect in another part. So these bottom teeth start to splay apart. And so the orthodontist, so I had orthodontic work as part of the extensive orthodontic work as part of the second reconstruction. I've gone to the orthodontist who was paid by work cover to treat me. His name's Bob James. He's retired now. I believe he might be teaching. And he simply said to me, mate, don't worry about work cover. You've been through enough. I'll bring your teeth back together. Don't worry about that. And he put braces on the inside and brought them together. Just an incredible piece of human kindness. He didn't want to put me through the bureaucracy of having that opened up. So, yes, very, very a great man. So I'm so grateful. And
it sometimes takes such awful situations and carnage, but it brings out this incredible part that's in so many of us, of generosity and kindness and compassion. Have you felt a lot of that from people, that when you share their story, it kind of gets them to check in with their own lives and be grateful themselves?
People become quite emotional when I speak because of, the photographs I'm telling them, the role playing that I do, and I tell them, and then I show the photograph, and it's some of them are just horrific, and it's not put there to shock us. This is the real world, and this is what people didn't see. So I'll give you an example. My dad's not much of a photographer, but he couldn't explain to my relatives, and then Dad says this, I don't take many photographs, it's just not me, but I couldn't explain to our relatives what you were going through. So I took a few photographs, and we didn't know it. I now, do this speaking, and I'll take people through the journey afterwards, a big part, which was the surgical procedures, and I'll tell them this is what I was going through. Oh, here's a photograph of me. And then I'll tell them, and they'll see something, and I'm like, oh, geez, that looks terrible. But then I'll tell them another story. Well, as you can see, my face is swelled out, massively contorted, and you can see the eyes bulging, sign of head trauma. But after a few weeks, that swelling will all go down. And so with the first reconstruction, I had 20 months off work. And people, would see me out, the shopping centres or doing something. They'd have a look at me, and they'd see a few missing teeth. And then they'd see, 20 months off work and make a snap judgment. Old Greenie, he's having it easy. And I say to people during my talk, well, I'll show you what I was going through that 20 months, and you can make up your own decision. And because it was all internal in my mouth, once the swelling goes down, it just looks like I'm missing 3 teeth. But they never saw the trauma of all the bone grafts, the skin grafts, the implants, and there's one horrific photograph that it gets gasps from the audience, but it really brings it home. It's not just for me, but for other people. So one of the things I talk about, support the supporters of those doing it tough. At the time, there was no help for my mum and dad. They weren't entitled to anything. But I was seeing a psychiatrist, and Dad became depressed over this, and this psychiatrist was being paid by work and was so good. I told him about Dad. So after he'd give me a session, he'd see Dad for 15 minutes, who could explain. My dad went on antidepressants and really helped him. So I was very, very grateful for this doctor and his insight, and that's since changed now. To what extent, I'm not sure, but there was great people. So that was a psychiatrist who basically volunteered a little bit of his time to help my dad, who was doing it psychologically tough.
It must be hard because obviously I can only see you through video, but I can't see any scarring or anything significant. So I'm assuming the bullet, penetrated through the skin and then just absolutely made a mess and carnage and just destroyed everything internally. But externally was, I suppose, minor in comparison to the shattered mess.
Yes, the lip was quite easy to repair, and the plastic surgeons did a great job on the lip. But yeah, it was internally. Once the bullet went internally, and I speak, and it's actually on my website. I've got a 3D video done up that shows the bullet striking my mouth and obliterating the maxillar bone, the 3 teeth, and the 2 bottom teeth, which had to be all repaired. And so one of the things that I take away is, and the great boss that I talk about, Inspector Dave Stevenson, who was such an incredible support. He one thing he hated about people, how others were so dismissive about what people were going through, and these snap judgments. And I've found it's only after people have gone through something themselves that they've gone, oh, I didn't realise I've said some things, or I've had some judgments. And there was an officer who tore his arm, muscle, during some training, and it took months. And he said to me, and he was a fairly young fellow, and he said to me that this has taught me a lesson, because if I saw the amount of time that the person had off just with a torn arm and a surgery, I would have, thought, you're taking advantage of it. Now I realise what a long process and how hard it is. And you may want to train hard, but you can't, because you'll damage it. And what a long process is, it is. And I've even seen that with a senior police officer who was I had a little bit of a different attitude about me, and then he had major surgery, and then he had a long rehab. And when he came back to work, he was a hell of a lot nicer to me. A few things clicked for him.
It's hard to put ourselves in another person's shoes, but these sort of stories kind of remind us that we can't go out and judge, on that surface level, because there is just so much more that's going on. Whether it be how the ripple effects of how your sleeping is, or an internal heart racing and major discomfort in certain areas, situations that trigger this experience to return, or whether it's biting on something and it gives a sensitivity to teeth, and it's another reminder altogether. There's an infinite number of things that kind of ripple through these things. That's one of the things people don't appreciate about PTSD. That's there's a natural response that has to occur to remind us, because it's there. If we're not reminded by it, we cease to have that survival instinct, and as much as we don't want it, unfortunately, that's the remnants of unfortunately being shot in the face.
Look, you can learn the healthy ways of how to deal with these instances when things crop up, and I'll give an example from my life. So, 2010, I've come a long way. I been awarded my criminal compensation. I became a firearms instructor. My career's back on track. Just been promoted to senior sergeant. And I was watching a series called The Pacific, and it was done by the HBO, the same people who did the series, the Band of Brothers. So I'm watching this previously, like in, I think it was 2001, the movie Black Hawk Down came out, and I watched that with family and friends, and my heart was racing. It triggered a lot for me. I sat through that. So 2010, I'm watching this mini-series, 10-part mini-series of Marines in the Pacific fighting the Japanese. And there was blood and there was gore and it was horrific. And I'm watching all that, and there's no adverse reactions whatsoever. And it's the 10th episode and the final one. I'm at my apartment, I'm cooking dinner, and I'm watching it. And there was this, that series was based on the memoirs of two Marines. And one of those Marines, he became a medic, and his parents didn't want him to join, but he did. And he's come home from the war, and that completely unscathed. But he's seen absolute carnage. And he's in bed, tossing and turning, having a nightmare from the war. And his father's outside his bedroom, the door's closed, and the father's leaning up against the door, feeling hopeless. And that triggered me an overwhelming feeling of guilt of what I put my parents through. Because after Mum suggested, darling, why don't you join the police? About 2 weeks after that, we're at the family home, we're on the veranda, it's in the evening, and my father says to me, son, I don't mind you joining the police, but I'd rather you join the federal police. And that way you wouldn't have to go to those terrible domestics and risk possibility of being shot or even killed. And I thought, what's the chances of that? I want to stay in the Sunshine State. I love Queensland. I love our weather. I'm sworn in with 400 other Queensland police officers, and I'm the only one shot. And did I feel some guilt? But I picked up the phone, I spoke to Mum and Dad, I told them what I was feeling about, and my dad simply said, you could have been a taxi driver and could have been murdered by somebody who just didn't want to pay their fees. And that was actually one of the very first jobs I went to in the police. I was in my first couple of weeks was guarding a crime scene when a taxi driver had been murdered by two people.
Yeah. One of the things that seems to just keep coming back in our conversation, and in doing some research before our conversation here, is how close you are with your family, how important they are, and it seems like they've been such a huge part of your recovery and who you are today. I saw a video of you receiving an award recently, and I I must say I did tear up somewhat. I had to hold it back a little bit with your father sort of saying some words at the end about how proud he was. That was a real touching moment. Has your family been a real sort of a big support piece that's helped you get through to today?
I wouldn't be here today if I never had a close and loving and supportive family. I'm sure that I'd most likely be dead, because it was just that difficult, and they were there to pick up the pieces, and I knew that, and I've had friends who've been in the opposite situation. I had one friend who was hospitalised, and that's when his wife decided to leave him, and just had a terrible effect on him. I'm just at the time I had a girlfriend, and that lasted for about 18 months, but it was a lot for her to deal with, and I don't think we were entirely compatible, and we weren't going to go down that road of getting married, but the unconditional love of my parents is what has got me through. And still to this day, I love bringing my dad good news of what's transpired. They were there for every step of the way. They know everything. And so when I give a keynote, there's only certain stories you can include, but they've lived the journey with me. And Mum passed on in 2016, which was a huge blow, but she was there to see a very key turning point in my life. And again, it was somebody else who, a little bit of human kindness. Two stories here. I'll try to be brief. 2006, I'm at the academy. I'm very closed off. A person described me as a complete ghost. Had this amazing boss, come in charge of me. And when I first saw him, I thought, I've had some, insensitive treatment before. What am I in for this grill of a boss? Nobody wanted to speak about the shooting. It was kind of taboo. But I had a colleague, and we were constables together, worked in the watch house. He's a recruit instructor, and he said to his boss, I wonder if Daryl's got anything to offer by speaking to my recruits about the shooting. He said, don't ask Daryl, go see his manager. My manager, oh, the shooting, we don't speak about it, it's kind of taboo. What are we going to do? Let's go see the inspector. So they go and see this big bear of a man. And he turns very busy, has time for one sentence. He turns us around and says, why don't we ask Daryl if he wishes to speak to Paul's request? Let's empower the man. And so I'm asked, and I'm agree. And this was a real turning point. And this is a person I like to speak to about a lot in my talks, Dave Stevenson. But what did this time pool boss do next? We're walking along the path. He's barreling along in the opposite direction. Hey, Greenie, I hear you going to speak to Paul's recruits about the shooting. Why if I come along, sit and listen? Might happen to be a better boss for you. And so there was a long process of building trust there with him. And he had a big influence on me. And I love talking about Dave and his leadership skills and breaking down those walls that I put in. So 2006, I started speaking. In 2014, had friends over for a barbecue. We spoke about a day. And I showed one of my mates what I'd been doing. I've been speaking to the recruits about the shooting. He had a look at it and he thought, there's probably a bit of room for improvement there. And he didn't really say anything. Now, he was a highly successful businessman, and he would get some coaching for his financial breakfasts that he would host. Married a beautiful Thai girl, Yui, and buys a Thai restaurant, builds a bar on it, and they have a function to celebrate the opening of the Tuk Tuk Bar. And he deliberately invites me along. And he comes over, puts his arm on, hey, Greenie, great to see you. I'd like to introduce somebody. Mike, this is Greenie. Here's a very interesting story. Introduced to a chap named Michael Alfasher and tell him a bit about my background. And he thinks, wow, that's a pretty amazing story. Turns out he's an executive performance coach. One of his core skills is teaching people public speaking. Later on, he confided in me, the next thing that ran through his mind, wow, Greenie, you got a lot to offer the world by speaking, but I know you can't afford my fees. But out of the goodness of his heart, and he saw something there, he volunteered his time, took me under his wing, started coaching me in speaking. And then I got introduced to professional speakers in Australia, and there was a scholarship that was offered by, and Mike said you should go for that. And there's a bit of a story behind that, feeling sorry for myself, thinking when I learned about the competition, But I'd learnt the lesson, feeling sorry for myself, got nowhere. I thought, well, Dave had faith in me and helped me refocus on my career. Mike has faith in me. He's been coaching me in speaking. So I got off my backside. I put together in 2 weeks a very long application. The process was very complex. And I also had to submit a mandatory video of you speaking in public. And you know how many I had? I had one. But anyway, Mum and Dad picked me up, took me to the airport, flew to the Scala event, and they made an announcement. And when they mentioned the Queensland Police, I had a quick look around. No other coppers here from Queensland. It must be me. And so that was the start of my professional speaking career. I was awarded the Kerry Nesh Scholarship for Public Speaking, and it's hence, helped me, launch Twice Shot, the branding and the speaking, and Dad loves the news of the speaking, so I love bringing it to him, and I love telling a true story.
What an incredible story, and nice to hear, with all that perseverance and support and people coming out of the woodworks. That there is a real positive ripple effect if you can see it, if you can work on it and appreciate it, because it doesn't come, by itself. And you've now launched a business on the side. You're speaking. Tell me a little bit about that.
With the scholarship comes a mentor, and so there's all these courses that you can do. And I had a mentor who lives quite close to me, and I used to, start off my talks telling a true inspiring story, with a little bit of what's happening next. The only thing was, it wasn't about me. And my mentor, Kevin Ryan, he said to me, Daryl, people are wanting to hear about you, not somebody else's story. And so, do you think you might have a story that you could start off with? And I thought, well, I've got a lot of stories being in the police at that stage for, nearly 25 years. It's getting up to nearly 30 now. And he said, soon as you were willing to drop that opening story, which talked about man flight, very inspiring story about Orville and Wilbur Wright. There's all these people, all the professionals trying to, all the engineering degrees and all this funds behind them. But you had two guys with a little bit of drive and a little bit of nous, and the first to achieve man-powered flight. And he said, as soon as you said, yep, I'm going to drop that. Let's go on with my own story set. I knew I could work with you. And he's been absolutely sensational. And with important talks, he still comes along, and we have dinner every couple of months. He coaches me still, and so it's still a huge journey. It's like somebody playing the violin, and you and I will hear and think, oh, it's magnificent. But somebody else will, all the player will say, I am so far to get to the next level, and that's like the speaking. And I love it. I've got a little bit of a knack for it. I'm quite a gregarious, outgoing person, which is the opposite when I got shot. And I've had friends say to me, you're nearly back to the old Green. After I got shot, I became closed off, very quiet. And fortunately, I've come much more closer to the older Green. He likes to tell a yarn and make people laugh, and then listen to their stories and have a laugh and have a good time. The funny thing is, my dad's my greatest, coach, because he'll sit down here and listen to me. But the funny thing, when I step on stage, one of our biggest fears, public speaking, I actually get energy to the stage. My performance actually improves with the crowd, So, and it's all about serving them, and so.
You've had a life of service, and you continue to go out and do that. From putting your body on the line on a everyday basis to now serving with your story and educating others and being an inspiration.
Very humbling it is. But I don't like being bored with people speak, and it happens so often. And the rostrum, the podium people speak from, if I could, I would take an axe and I would cut that.
How can people find out more about you, Daryl?
Simply, if they go to twiceshot.com, that's my website. So that's got all my information in there, my top 7 resilience lessons, as my video snippets of me speaking. It's got the audio of the shooting on there, the full audio. There's a keynote on there as well, video library, and a little bit on social media. I'm not as active on social media as I would like, just simply because the other commitments in my life, not only my normal, my day job, but I'm now looking after all the financial affairs for my 87-year-old father, and my 92-year-old uncle has had a stroke and is in a home, and I have the enduring power of attorney, and that's been another battle. I've got some stories around that. I just unbelievable barriers. It just boggles the mind, and then you learn all these businesses are opening during business hours. So I'm in a training role right now, Monday to Friday, and it's been so challenging because come the weekend I can't do anything. So I've had to take days off or work really early shifts, and it's a really long process, this enduring power of attorney. But we're getting there step by step.
Another tough road, and you're certainly a tough cookie, and I'm sure you'll use your perseverance and everything that you've learned to get through that as well. I think it's incredible what you do, and every day you serve our community, and likewise your fellow colleagues. I think we can all appreciate what you guys do just that little bit more after hearing this as well. So are your contact details on your website as well if anyone wants to reach out or find out more about how they might engage you?
Yeah, my email's there, my manager's details there, but if anybody wants to reach me, you can reach me directly at daryl@twiceshot.com, DARYL, and Nesh, it's been a real privilege to speak on this show and send a message of hope to people, and talk about and acknowledge those great people like the Dave Stevensons of that world, and those great parents, because they've had a hard road too. And Dave Stevenson said to me, I used to lie awake at night and thinking how the commissioner, our former commissioner, Bob Atkinson, a highly respected man, how he would like me to treat you. And that was his level of commitment. I once said to him, crossing a path after I graduated and got my degree, Dave, I wasn't firing on all 8 cylinders. Thanks for your support. He said, Greenie, thanks for your support, and it was just great working under you. He said, Greenie, you never worked under me, you worked with me. Incredibly humble man. Unfortunately, he has passed on, but I had the honour to be a pallbearer at his funeral, and I wrote a valediction or a tribute to him. And if I could just mention 2 quick stories about this man. One of the things that he would do was each day he tried to talk to people in the office about something that wasn't work related. And we had one fellow, Mike Wallace, a multimedia developer from England. He loved the Crystal Palace football team. So, hey, Mike, how'd your team go on the weekend? And Mike launched in how the match went, etc. But Dave was also judging how he was going, at work, at home, and life in general. And so he could help if there was, something going on. And one of those people in the office had a fall on a weekend, had a brain injury. He ended up in hospital for 3 months. His mother couldn't drive. When Dave went to visit him, he went and picked his mother up, rang her, and said, Marie, I'm going to see Trevor. Would you like me to, pick you up on the way? And he'd take him up. And so he had these incredible personal skills, and he worked very, very hard. So it wasn't just me, and I know that. And it's in the valediction. What happened was the day after he died, I was at my office at work, and a senior constable walked by and passed my office door and then walked back. And she's come into my office, and she was tears just flooding out. And she said, you won't remember me, but I heard you talk about what happened to you and working under Dave Stevenson, what he did. I then worked under him as a member of the Australian Federal Police at the airport. He was everything you said he was. It wasn't just me, and he worked hard for everybody. And my dad loves me talking about that individual because he wrote a letter once when I graduated in 2008 with a master's degree, which was a big load on mine, and he said, Dave, we could only do so much on the home front. You were there on the work front. Thank you. And so it takes many, many people to help somebody get through something like this.
Well said, and I think your story, your recovery, your attitude is a tribute to all of those as well, and I dare say good reason why they've also been the way that they have been with you.
I got lucky in the game of life with great parents. They're your first mentors. And then I got lucky that I got no sort of permanent physical disadvantage from the shooting. And then I had all these great people come into my life. And I think probably the number one thing that I learned is and it was a conversation with Dave Stevenson, and I thanked him for his wisdom. And he said, "Greenie, you may not have realised, but I never told you to do anything. I only made suggestions, and because you act on a suggestion, I invested more and more in you." So, it was a lot of getting off my backside, but when I was a bit lost, I had my folks there. I had Dave Stevenson's there, and I hope our listeners can, they have, a great family, or if not a family, great friends and great supporters at work, and listen to them and dig deep, find that grit, and to keep on going, because you can achieve amazing things and live a great life no matter what you've been through.
I think that's a good place to finish up on. Daryl, I really appreciate your time and sharing so openly. And if I can say, Greenie, I wish you all the best in continuing to serve us, and from all of us, I really do genuinely, acknowledge and appreciate how much your profession gives us all. So thank you.
Nesh, I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to thank the audience for their time and sharing a little bit of the journey that I, my family, and close friends and colleagues have been on.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please support it by going to iTunes and putting a review, subscribe, share it via social media, and tell others about it. Start a conversation. It's listeners like you that make this able and possible, and why we bring in these guests to go out and share their knowledge and resources. And just lastly, if you are a psychologist and you want to go out and be part of a bigger team, develop your experience and get into some exciting work, come to strategicpsychology.com.au/careers and reach out. I'd love to hear from you.